And the problem that Rishi Sunak has is his predecessor, Liz Truss, the shock that people had then in terms of mortgages needing to go up and the government seeming to have no control over the economy. And that is still, I think, probably what people are going to remember when they come to vote in a year or so's time, rather than the statistical niceties of where the interest rate is. There are an awful lot of statistics going around. It is clearly significant that the rate of inflation is dropping. That, of course, is one of the central targets set by the Prime Minister to deliver. And at 6.8, it looks as if he might hit the 5.3 by the end of the year, which is his pledge to halve inflation in the course of a year. So that is, relatively speaking, a sort of statistical gain for the Conservatives at the moment. There's also a significance in as much as 6.8 is now less than the rate of inflation of earnings. And so what that means is, theoretically, people who are getting pay rises should now feel that they have slightly more money in their pockets. That obviously relates to the economic feel-good factor. That said, there's still an awful long way to go. Remember that the official target is inflation of no more than 2%. Also remember that Britain continues with this figure to have the highest inflation in the G7 and to be more than twice the inflation rate, for example, in the United States. So while statistically you can see some good news, in reality, inflation moving at this rate, or even if it's 5% at the end of the year, is something that people are going to feel when they come to pay for things. He set himself targets. He set himself 5 targets, you'll remember. And it looks as if the inflation one is the one he's most likely to be able to deliver. We know that ending small boats is not looking likely by the end of the year. We also know that the targets on the level of the national debt and the growth rate also look quite difficult. So he needs something to be able to present to people. I feel personally that, it's all very well governments talking about economic targets and delivering on them, but unless they are spectacularly relating to people's everyday feelings about their own particular financial situation, I think they probably don't really register with people. And the problem that Rishi Sunak has is his predecessor, Liz Truss, the shock that people had then in terms of mortgages needing to go up and the government seeming to have no control over the economy. And that is still, I think, probably what people are going to remember when they come to vote in a year or so's time, rather than the statistical niceties of where the interest rate is. I think, in my sense, these are campaigning slogans which, as I say, don't necessarily relate to the realities of what people are feeling. I mean, one might say, well, the government's got to do something. So, for example, promising to deliver these 5 pledges. The problem is that most people live in the here and now, and if you're pledging about making things better in the future, implicitly you're actually saying, well, things maybe not that great at the moment. And that, I think, is one of the problems that any government that's been in power for a long time, when things aren't booming, has when it comes to an election. Well, or indeed domestic economic trends. I mean, the answer is he hasn't really done things that have changed things. We remember, first of all, that interest rates are controlled by an independent Bank of England. That, of course, is a cost factor as far as the voters are concerned, because with inflation at this level and the target at 2%, it's generally expected that the cost of borrowing is going to go up probably to around 6% over the next few months. That is going to have a knock-on effect on people's mortgages if they are having to renew them or get them for the first time. They're going to find it more expensive still. That's going to be a very significant feel-bad factor. Also, if you look at the elements in why this inflation has come down, the main one is to do with global energy prices, which frankly the government hasn't had an awful lot to do with. All it's been trying to do is to insulate people from the very big hikes which followed the outbreak of the Ukraine war. So can the government take credit for this? I suppose in a managerial sense it can say we provided over an economic system when inflation has come down. It's not much of a boast because inflation has pretty much come down across comparable economies as well. Yeah, well, I mean, what Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives are trying to say is to get back to the traditional position of the Conservatives, which is that the electorate trusts them with the economy and they don't trust Labour. I think the problem they have at the moment is while you can write scare stories about Labour before Keir Starmer under Jeremy Corbyn, or Labour making very wild spending pledges or pledges that would definitely lead to taxes going up, we know that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, his shadow chancellor, are doing all they can to broadly say that their management of the economy would not break with the sort of headline management of the economy that we're seeing under the Conservatives. So it's pretty difficult to run a scare story against a party which is saying it's going to do pretty much the same as, or inherit the same economy as you're already running for the Conservatives. Well, the big issue on the economy in the Conservative Party is a substantial minority who feel that in the end they should be cutting taxes and probably cutting public spending more. That is what those people see as classic conservatism, and they feel that the kind of managerial approach which Rishi Sunak is taking is not sufficient, and he will continue, I think, to be under pressure to cut taxes, whether or not they conform to a rational approach to managing the economy. And all we know about him so far, as someone who's come out of the Treasury, former Chancellor, is that he, and indeed probably a majority of Conservatives, are going to be resistant to those calls. But that, I think, is where the stress is going to be. I think, well, what we've heard from Labour is obviously they can't criticise something which means that the cost of living is going up less than it was before, and they welcome it. What they have been saying, however, is what I was talking about earlier on, harking back to Tory economic management over the past 15 years, the Truss years, and the fact that still relatively to our competitors, our economic performance is not that great.
Towards the next election?
Yeah, he's saying he sees light at the end of the tunnel, and within his the target he's set himself of halving inflation, it looks that might be within reach. Whether that means that it's going to be sweetness and light for the Conservatives as far as economic management is a different matter, because of course it's expected with inflation at these levels that the cost of borrowing will go up. That will lead to mortgages going up, and economic pessimists say, well, we might end up in a wage prices spiral, which means, of course, if we do, that he wouldn't hit his own self-set target by the end of the year.